Waire, waire, runga, waire, raro, waire, ngangaru, waire, waire. Waire, angaru nui, angaru roa, waire, kia tau mai te Māori, he Māori ora. He Māori tiaki mai nei te ora kaputa i a hānuku i a hārangi koia ko te hāora o te tangata. Ko wahaka ki, ko taringa ka mau, ko wānanga ka hua. Hoi rā e rongo whakairi ake ki runga ki a tīna whāno whanake tū mai te toki a haumi e. Hui e, tai ki e.
Kia ora. Welcome to the Whakapuāwai Podcast Series, developed by the Centre for Indigenous Psychologies. During this series, our intent is to develop and deepen understandings of Indigenous psychologies and why they matter. Through our conversations with Māori and Indigenous peoples who are leaders in their fields of expertise, we will highlight the ways they are guiding, being integrated into and transforming thinking and acting across a range of disciplines and applied areas. So join us on this journey as we delve into the varied worlds of Māori and Indigenous peoples and better appreciate the ways Indigenous psychologies are affecting positive change in Aotearoa, New Zealand and beyond. In this podcast, our Kairangahau Research Officer Lorena is honoured to sit down and speak with Maui Solomon. Maui is a barrister, renowned Indigenous rights activist, mediator and negotiator in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the Pacific and internationally. Maui is of Moriori descent of Rēkohu, Chatham Islands, and he is also of Ngai Tahu and Pākehā descent. He has 35 years legal experience, specialising in treaty law, land and fishing claims, cultural and intellectual property, and environmental law. Maui has represented iwi Māori from throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand, as well as other peoples from around the Pacific. With an outstanding career and personal history as a legal and political leader, Maui has also been a long-standing advocate for the recognition of the customary rights and identity of Moriori. He was the chief negotiator for the Moriori Treaty Settlement, which was signed in February 2020, recognising the devastation enacted upon Moriori. Additionally, Maui was the CEO for Hokotehi Moriori Trust for 12 years, which was formed for the purposes of representing Moriori and for the advancement of Moriori health, welfare and education. Maui lives on Rēkohu with his wife, and they have planted thousands of trees on a mission to make Rēkohu more sustainable. He continues to uphold Moriori culture. It is and has been his life's work to use his voice to advocate for Moriori. Please enjoy this kōrero between Lorena and Maui.
Maui, welcome, welcome, welcome. It is an honour to have you here with us as part of the Whakapuāwai Podcast Series.
Oh, kia oranga, Lorena. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for that very long introduction. But I've done one or two things, but over the course of my career. But it feels like I've sort of come home full circle and growing and planting native trees and looking after the hinu or the whenua is probably one of the most meaningful and important things I feel I can be doing in my life to date, apart from loving my family and being with them.
For this podcast, I would love to, with all your wisdom and all the incredible work that you have done for Indigenous rights, not only here in Rēkohu and in Aotearoa, but internationally. Why do you feel, Maui, that elevating, recognizing those Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous knowledge, acknowledging Indigenous whakaaro has been important to you, Mahi, to your life?
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. I guess when I think back on what has influenced the way I look at the world and the work that I've been doing, I remember as a young man in my teens, I spent time with one of my Ngai Tahu elders, Mai Paike, from Temuka, when I was about 15, 16, 17. And, I grew up really not knowing anything about my Moriori whakapapa or identity, but I knew we were Moriori and Māori, and I'm also Pākehā. My mum's Pākehā, so I've got English, Irish, German, and a bit of French in there as well, and Malaysian. So I'm a real mongrel, I'm a real mixed bag. Tick all the boxes in Aotearoa, New Zealand, though. So I remember distinctly this one meeting I had, or visit I had, with this Kroa, and he started telling me all of the Māori names around Temuka, where I grew up. And he explained to me that it wasn't Temuka. Temuka was a abbreviated version of Te Umukaha. And Te Umukaha means the strong oven. And it was named that because Māori used the local clay for making hangi. And it really made very hot hangi, the earth. And so, of course, Temuka is famous for its pottery. And Te Umukaha means the strong oven because of the clay soils there. But also, he explained about other things. Lake Tekapo is actually Lake Takapo. And he explained the story behind how it got its name. And Takapo means preparing to leave early in the morning, because back in the day, the Māori would travel up the Waitaki River and gather eels and duck and weka and things like that. Then they would build these mokahi, these river reed waka or mokahi, and then they would pole from the lake all the way down to the mouth of the Waitaki River, carrying all their kai. And so they would leave early in the morning. And so I suddenly started to see, it was like someone painting the landscape or repainting the landscape I'd grown up with and filling it with colour, a different colour, an Indigenous colour. And it occurred to me that I didn't know any of this. And why didn't I know any of this? Is because it wasn't taught in our schools. It wasn't something that was relevant to New Zealand at that time. It was relevant to Māori, and it was relevant to me because it's an integral part of my identity. And I sort of thought, well, you know, this was a revelation. This was like the shades coming away from my eyes, thinking there's a whole different Indigenous knowledge of this landscape that I've grown up in. And why haven't I learnt about this? And this knowledge, that little glimpse of it, seemed so important to me and to my identity. And in many ways, that sort of set me on a path of rediscovering truly who I was, not just as a Māori, but then later as a Moriori. And so it did have quite a big influence on my thinking and outlook on life, I guess.
Maui, that's amazing. Thank you. That repainting of reality, the repainting with an Indigenous palette.
Exactly.
And giving us more color, giving us colors that we never knew existed, giving colors that have deep and long and standing millennia-long stories behind them. In schooling, they do make us only look at one color. You either told your stories in that school.
Look, I've got very, very fond memories of Temuka High School and the people that my friends. In fact, I still keep in touch with many of my friends from Temuka. We've got our own Facebook site, and so we regularly keep in touch. But you're right, I didn't learn anything about New Zealand history or Māori history or heaven forbid, Moriori history. And actually, I really enjoyed history. But the history I was learning was Italian history and Russian history and English history, nothing about ourselves. And that, not that I didn't know enough at that stage to question it, but I do remember a teacher telling me when I was in maybe third or fourth form that there were no such thing as Moriori. And I said, but sir, I am Moriori. My grandfather was full Moriori. And he said, oh no, they're just a myth, or they're extinct. And I didn't know anything to question that. But, you know, I subsequently learned that this was an experience that many of my family and a lot of other Moriori had similarly experienced. But, you know, I certainly felt, rightly or wrongly, but when I look back on it, that I was branded as that inverted commas Maori kid, and there was a soft kind of prejudice, I would say, looking back, because I come from a very large family, and my brothers and sisters, I'm number 11 out of 13, and so I'd already, was branded before I arrived at school. And I guess expectations of me were very low. And so I lived up to those expectations, or down to those expectations in many ways. And it really wasn't until I went overseas as a Rotary Exchange student. And I've got to say, Temuka High School, I'm grateful to this teacher who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and encouraged me to apply for this Rotary Exchange scholarship. And I've got to say, it's the same teacher who had said to me some years before that, Moriori didn't exist. He later apologised later in life when we met up at a school reunion, but he encouraged me to apply for this scholarship. So I went to Canada as a Rotary Exchange student in 1978 and attended a couple of schools over there. And it was one of these schools I went to at called Tuxedo Shaftesbury, a very flash name, but it was a very flash neighborhood. And I just reveled in this school, and I just enjoyed the education experience. And because I felt I was being treated as a young adult and not looked down on, that I decided I wanted to do well. And so I ended up getting A's and B pluses for my subjects that I'd never, ever dreamed was possible, because I didn't work hard enough at Temuka High School. And so I really enjoyed that education experience and came back and then decided to go to law school. So, I'm very grateful to Temuka High School for the opportunity it gave me, and I have very fond memories. But it's not so much the school. I think it was because it wasn't a feature of our curriculum, and they were only teaching what the curriculum outlined. And in the case of Moriori history, in 1916, they produced all these school journals saying that Moriori were Malaysian, or that we were an earlier people who have settled in New Zealand prior to Māori and were driven out, and all of these myths and misconceptions that generations of New Zealanders were brought up being taught at school, and actually many of the older generations still believe that today. And so part of mine and with the assistance of my wife Susan have been trying to correct that narrative and having the truth told about Moriori. But it's not just Moriori. Clearly, Māori history has been misrepresented in New Zealand, and still is. When you have one of the coalition partners rewriting the so-called articles or principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, and saying that Article 2 guarantees tino rangatiratanga to all New Zealanders, that's just a load of tosh. Clearly that's not the case. If he'd read the treaty, he would understand it. So part of this whole ignorance and misunderstanding is because Māori and Moriori history, Indigenous history of our nation, has not been part of our upbringing or part of our school curriculum or part of our lives. It always has been on the marae, but never as part of mainstream education in New Zealand. And it's time that happened.
Thank you, Maui. Is the rewriting of history that the dominant narrative always does and continues to try to do? Absolutely. That takes me, Maui, to reflect and to say you went to that fanciest school in Canada.
I don't know if it was the fanciest, but it was probably the fanciest in Winnipeg.
So you went to that school, and then you returned and decided to go into law. What was the intention behind that?
Yeah, interesting question. Well, the president of the Temuka Rotary Club, he was a lawyer, Noel Shannon, and he was kind of like a father figure to me. And I he was so supportive, lovely man. And then when I went to Canada, I also stayed with a family, and the father was a lawyer. And so those things probably had a subconscious influence, because I had considered going to forestry, being a phys ed teacher, and a whole range of other things I was even invited to join the Canadian Mounted Police while I was in Canada, funnily enough. Anyway, I came home and I decided to go to law school. Actually, coming back to this Māori elder of mine, Te Maio Paiki, I said to him, this is what I was wanting to do. And I remember his words distinctly. He said, well, Maui, you go to that place, you go to that institution, and you learn everything you can about the Pākehā world, and then use that to help your own people. So that was a very important piece of advice he gave me. The other piece of advice he gave was keep your standards high, improve. I can't say that I met his second expectations, but I certainly used my skills my education and university degree to help my own Moriori and Māori people, and that's been a tough journey, but it's also been a rewarding one in many ways.
I think I'm biased, but I believe that you absolutely exceeded his expectations, and not only of his, but also of Tame Horomana Rehe, you wonderful ancestor, Maui Solomon. When you came back into law, you became also the chairman for the Memorial Trust Foundation under your grandfather's name. What was it like to start something like that at 24?
Yes, well, we had goodness, that's going back a wee way now, but so we had a family reunion in 83, Christmas 83, January 84. And in fact, we're having a 40-year reunion this Easter, as a matter of fact, since that last one. And that's where the idea of the statue project, the memorial for Moriori, came about. For some reason, the family, asked me to be the inaugural chair of the Maui Solomon Memorial Trust Foundation. And whether it's because I'd just graduated was about to graduate with a law degree, or had been involved myself in helping to organise that reunion. So, as the saying goes, no good deed ever goes unpunished. So I was given the role of chair. And so we had committees in Temuka and the island and elsewhere, and we raised funds for put up the statue of Grandad, and that was really, I suppose, the start of our long journey to as both the Solomon family and then other Moriori families joined in to recover our identity as Moriori and rediscover our history. And Michael King was approached to write the book Moriori People Rediscovered. Then, I filed a claim in the Waitangi Tribunal in 1988 over lands claiming rights under the Treaty Waitangi for our lands and fisheries and other things. So, yeah, Grandad, that his statue has stood as a silent sentinel over the last almost 40 years, over that whole revival of our people and our culture and identity, which is an ongoing thing. So I'm sitting here living on Rekohu today, and I wouldn't have envisaged that being the case, when I was 23. But sitting here and looking out at the beautiful sea view and the salt air wafting around over my long locks of hair, it's a beautiful place to be. In fact, where I am, Lorena, at a place on the south coast of Rekohu called Otonga, and it's my great granddad, so Tommy's dad, is actually buried about a kilometre down the road. So this piece of land that we've bought here is, like coming back to another part of our family land, our Hindu. Yes, I'm reconnecting with a part of my Moriori identity by coming to this place called Kōrero, which is beautiful.
Absolutely is. What a beautiful welcoming committee with your great grandfather there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how it worked out, because I'd applied for a partition at Manuka, which is our family land on the southeast coast, and where Susan and I lived for about 12, 14 years. But that partition wasn't successful, and within a couple of weeks, this door of opportunity opened over here on this coast. This lady was leaving, and she wanted the land to go to someone who she knew would look after it. So she approached myself and Susan, and I came and we looked at it and fell in love with it. And the fact that it was also once had been a Moriori kāinga where my own family come from, it really sort of clinched the deal. And here we are, a couple of years later.
That is wonderful. I think that was decided way before you made the decision to look for a land, I believe.
I think you're right, Lorena. It's kind of like my karapuna, my great granddad was saying, well, boy, you've spent a lot of time, 30 odd years, looking after Manukau. Now come over here and you can look after yourself, your family, your own family now.
You're now being called back to rest, but not rest, because the work that you're doing in the island is enormous. But that is after decades of absolutely looking after your people in many other ways. You were central to the Moriori Treaty Settlement in 2020. And can you tell us a little bit more about the process of that settlement and also the Moriori Claim Settlement Act in 2021?
Yeah, so it's like most settlements, they're a very long journey. So the claim was filed in 1988. It was heard in 94, 95. We got a report in 2001. We signed terms of negotiation with the Crown in 2004, and we were in negotiations for 3 or 4 years. Then the Crown decided to halt those negotiations. They were restarted in 2016, and we finally got a settlement in 2020. So, it's a very, very long time to be in negotiations. And although we had a report from the Waitangi Tribunal that pretty much upheld all of the main tenets of our claims, it was like Groundhog Day starting negotiations with the Crown, because they said, well, look, the tribunal findings are only recommendations. We're not bound by those. And so we're pretty much starting with a clean slate. And so we had to then do a whole lot of research to reprove our case to the Crown, which I just found absolutely astonishing. It was really, the Moriori claim was one of the most straightforward in the history of our nation. And in fact, the tribunal even said it should have been one of the first claims to have been settled. And yet you come out at the end of that long tunnel feeling more aggrieved in many respects than you did at the start of the negotiations, because of the way you've been treated or mistreated. Sure, we got an apology, we got an agreed historical account, and a bit of land come back to us. Most 90%, 98% of that land all tagged with conditions, reserves, and the condition of it is shocking. We've got to restore it and spend our settlement money improving that land and those buildings because they're all run down. But we got $18 million, and I go, well, $18 million for genocide, really? They spent $54 million on a wharf, $40 million on an airport, but 172-year-old claim for Moriori, and all you can give us is $18 million. It's not even a drop in the bucket. But you look, we settled, we signed the deed of settlement and what have you, but you're still feeling like justice hasn't been done. And I don't want to be too sour grapes, because there's some good aspects of that settlement, but negotiating any settlement with the Crown, not only is it a long and arduous process, particularly when you're a small and insignificant, as far as the Crown is concerned, imi or tribe, because we're stuck out here in the ocean. When our bill was introduced to the House, a very historic occasion, and we went, there were 100 plus Moriori and supporters who came to listen to that bill being introduced. The Prime Minister was there and a whole lot of cabinet ministers. And, it was the first time that the Crown had to acknowledge Moriori in their marae. or at all, really, at Parliament. And so it was historic from that point of view. And certainly, my Rapana Hirawana Tapu had written this 131-page petition to Governor Gray in 1862. We don't know if there was a formal response. So this was historic in early, I think it was 2021, or it might have been 2020 that when the bill was introduced. And just as the Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, was introducing the bill, and after we'd sat for an hour listening to the various parties abusing one another and being rude to one another across the chamber, just as he was introducing our bill, the Prime Minister and her cabinet colleagues, including the Minister of Māori Affairs, all got up, packed up their papers and were talking and walking out of the chamber while our bill was being introduced to Parliament for the first time. And I just sat here absolutely astonished. I was gutted, to be honest. I knew that, treaty settlements by and large are a box-ticking exercise, but that really rammed home to me just how insignificant this was to the Crown. To have the Prime Minister get up and walk out, it was a gutting experience for my people. It's something I'll never forget. And so for me, there's still this sense of unresolved issues, and that might never go away. I just want to say that those politicians who did remain and spoke to the bill really did touch our hearts, because they spoke with genuineness and the aroha from all sides of the House. So I don't want to leave an impression that we were just dismissed, because those who did stay and speak to it really touched us. But really, to have the head of government, and that's the Prime Minister and her cabinet ministers, walk out while the bill was being introduced really was, it was not a good look.
Thank you, Maui. It is, as you were saying, it's the continued denial and diminishing of our peoples that, for a lot of the Indigenous world, the Moriori people represent the best of the best. It represents a people that have the strong covenant of peace. So to have the Crown not acknowledging some of the peoples that have given the most hope, the most leadership across the world, the story of Moriori across the world, for Indigenous brothers and sisters, is one of enormous mana, of enormous hope, of enormous possibility. And I can share entirely that gutting feeling to know that the Crown and those in the leadership could not be present. It is in that covenant of peace that I've seen Moriori history being written, and it feels that with your leadership it continues to be. It continues to be that peace and that love for the island, the love for Rekohu continues, and the love for not only you people right now, but even those that have gone. And it reminds me of the amazing work that was done. Well, it has been done for many decades again, but it came to fruition in 2023, and it was a repatriation of the remains of you ancestors. I think it was spread across, it is spread across a lot of Europe, but these ones were from 7 different institutions in Germany. Maui, can you share a little bit about that massive journey?
Yes. Look, just before I do that, if you'll permit me, coming to talk about the peace covenant a little bit and the repatriation of our koimi chakat. Yes, Moriori had lived for centuries in these islands and had set aside warfare, killing, cannibalism, and a ritualized combat. So the law was first blood drawn, honor satisfied, no killing. And they lived like that for 500 years. That toto hungatanga, that knowledge was passed from one generation to the next during a tohinga or baptism, a rite of passage from childhood. And so that it was very important to Moriori, was passed on from father to son. And when the islands were invaded in 1835, Moriori collectively made a decision not to fight and kill those who had arrived, and they didn't have any insight that the two tribes who arrived here from Wellington, Ngāti Muto, Ngāti Tama, were going to do what they did, because they had experience of sealing and whaling ships coming and people staying and then leaving, and so Moriori, in accordance with our tikani, our customs, welcomed them, fed them, nursed them back to health because they've been very unwell from that voyage. And then once they got their health back, they started to takahi the land, and the rest happened. And so our population plummeted from around 1800 and 1835 to a mere 100 by 1870. So in 35 years, our population had collapsed by over 95%. And a lot of our our ancestors' funerary practices, the main way of burying our dead was in sand dunes and facing east, facing the rising sun, which is a Polynesian tradition. But also there were many human remains that lay scattered around the island as a result of the pogroms that happened in the sort of mid-19th century, early to mid-19th century. And so a lot of, I call them bone collectors, came down here in the late 19th century and onwards, and gathered up Moriori human remains and took them to New Zealand and traded them to overseas institutions. So there are literally hundreds and hundreds of our karapuna, our ancestors' human remains throughout New Zealand institutions, museums, universities, as well as overseas. And so Moriori have been working with Te Papa Tongarewa for the last 25 plus years to repatriate these human remains, and my wife Susan has been a central figure and a key researcher for facilitating and working with these international institutions and local institutions to bring our karapuna home. So Susan and I travelled to London in 2022 and we were working with the Natural History Museum. We brought back over 100 Moriori koimi back to Te Papa, and that was a really special, very special occasion. And I think it's one of the most important things we can do is to bring our ancestors home and eventually bring them back to their kohu and Rangihauti on Pitt Island. But I can't speak highly enough of Te Papa and the way that they have enabled and worked with and treated Moriori with mana and dignity. And I really, out of all of the institutions we've worked with, Te Papa is right up there at the top. Right from the day Te Papa opened its doors, they've been nothing but kind and generous and helpful towards Moriori, and that's been hugely important to us. And right down to this day, they still are, and that's fantastic. So, but I also want to give a shout out to my own wife, because she's done some tremendous work. Long before we got together, she was working on this kaupapa. So, it's hugely important to bring back our ancestors, both Māori and Moriori, and bring them home where they belong.
Thank you, Maui, and the recognition of the enormous effort that it takes, and it takes our whole families, and it takes enormous dedication. I've seen both you and Susan's enormous dedication to this cause, and to see last year it coming to fruition. There's still so many to go, but they will follow. They will always find home. It takes me to think about that cloak that you're building, Maui, and one of very important work that you've done is with flora and fauna, and in the Y262 work that you have done that was born of 6 tipuna that put their claim, and was the 262nd claim for the Waitangi Tribunal, and it was commonly known as the Fauna, Flora and Intellectual Property Rights claim. Can you tell us a little bit more about these, Maui, about your involvement in Y262?
Thank you. So I first got involved with Y262 in 1992, And I'd recently just gone out as a barrister on my own in Wellington, and I was good friends with Wana Jackson, the late Wana Jackson, late great, and also Karen Fox, as she was then, now Chief Judge Fox of the Māori Land Court. And they were, both of those people had set up the Māori legal services in Wellington in the late 80s. And Wana Jackson had drafted the original Y262 claim and filed it. But they needed a lawyer to actually represent to act as counsel for the claimants. So they approached me, and I was instructed to as counsel at that time, originally for the 6 tribes, but I ended up representing the 3 northern tribes because it was such a massive claim, and the other 3 claimants got their own lawyer, but I represented Ngāti Kuri, Ngāti Wai, and Te Rarawa. And it was a huge privilege for me to work with those claimants, and particularly Himanui Tāwhaki Witana, otherwise known as Del Wihongi, and Sana Murray, and Hori Parata over a 20-year period. And it was a huge learning curve for me, but not only working with them, but working with the other claimants, experts on rongo Māori, on whakapapa, on whakaero, weaving, and the fact that they were willing to share their knowledge with me in order that I could, prepare their briefs of evidence and things like that. So that was a huge learning journey for me, and I guess that's also helped to sort of shape the way that I come to see the world as well, because what the claimants, they weren't making this claim for any personal gain. They were doing it because they could see the need and the importance of protecting mātauranga Māori, traditional Māori knowledge, taonga Māori, flora and fauna, looking after it, and giving back, and not keep taking from it, and nurturing it. And so I came to see that mainly through these claimants, that before we talk about Indigenous rights, we really need to talk about Indigenous responsibilities. And I've written a few papers about that, because the way Indigenous people see the world is that they have responsibilities to the atua, to Tangaroa, to Tāne Mahuta, to Tāwhiri and for example, before you go, when you take a tree to build a waka, you have to seek permission. You say your karaki, you ask approval, you use every piece, you don't waste anything. The same with Tangaroa, when you're fishing, you say your karaki and you give your first back as a koha. So it's a different kind of way of interacting with the world and seeing the world. It's not just about humans dominating Mother Earth and seeing ourselves as superior to every other being. No. And in fact, in accordance with hokapapa and whakapapa, humans are right down the bottom of that long chain. Our ancestors literally are Tāne Mahuta and Tāwhiri, all of those creator beings. And so we have a responsibility as the later comers, the later generations, to honor and to look after those deities. And so this is why I think, it's so relevant to the world today that paradigm of thinking starts to prevail, because this last 200 years of capitalism, materialism, consumption, overconsumption, it's created a situation where the world is, our beautiful, precious planet is now in peril. And we need to bring back some of those values of putting others before ourselves. And those others are our precious planet. And because it nurtures us. Without Mother Earth, without Tangaroa, we're nothing. We don't exist. We come from those things, literally, in our whakapapa and in Moriori epistemology, in our tradition. Deity Rangi Tukuna, who separated Papatunuku and Ranginui, and he did this not by forcing them, separating with his shoulders on the earth and pushing up with his legs, but placing 10 pillars between those primordial parents and allowing light to flood in and life and light and life to flourish on earth. And then what he did to create the first human being, he heaped up earth in the shape of a tree, and then to give the modi, the energy, the life force to that inanimate pile of it. Well, it's not inanimate. Earth is full of microorganisms, but that's another story. But to animate that first human, he placed the spirit of a manu, a bird, into that tree-shaped pile of earth, and the first human comes into existence. Now, when that's your tradition, that you come from the earth, you in the shape of a tree and the spirit of a bird, you have an innate obligation to look after those things, because that's where you come from. And all humans come from that. We all come from the earth. We all come from the sea. And it's a beautiful thing. And so when I came to understand that later on in my journey, I realized just how, it was in my DNA to do what I'm now doing. And it's so fulfilling, walking through that ngahere and seeing those trees flourish. And if you give an opportunity, if you stop taking and start giving a little bit back to Papatūānuku, how wonderfully she responds, how beautiful it is to see this. And all you're doing is a helping hand, but she's doing all the work to see those beautiful trees, how they flourish, how they grow, and the birds coming back and spreading the seed. It's just a really life-affirming, wonderful experience. And it's something that I'm now able to share with my mokapu, my grandson and my children, and it's certainly, locals here on the island are seeing the difference that makes. But coming back to the Y262, this is really what that claim's about. Indigenous peoples in New Zealand, on Kohu, worldwide, we love the earth. Sure, we have used it, and sometimes we've abused it, but we've learnt those lessons, we've retained those values, and Indigenous peoples are ready and willing, and always have been, to share that with the rest of the world, to share it with Western nations. And we're saying in these international forums, involve us in this decision making, because we have millennia of ancient knowledge that can help restore the modi and the integrity of our planet. Slowly there are some evidence of, I was at APEC in San Francisco in November last year, and the WTO in Geneva in might have been in July last year, and slowly there's little cracks starting to happen in the doors. There's a little bit of light starting to come through, and people are starting to say, yes, Indigenous people do have an important contribution to make to the climate crisis that we're facing, and we need to involve them more. But I suspect and know that, there are some pretty major multinationals who really pull the strings behind the governments, who still want to extract as much as possible from the earth and from the sea, and will push back and are pushing back strongly against that. But Indigenous peoples, we see things. It's like this current government, this coalition. Sure, they're saying things that are an anathema to Māori, to Indigenous people, talking about withdrawing from the UN declaration, but we see things in the long term, not in the short term. So governments will come and go, but we're always going to be here, and we're always going to be doing what we're doing, and long may that last.
I was thinking one of the first taonga that were introduced for that protection with Y262 was the kumara. And it is in their understanding of those millennial connections across Indigenous cultures, the knowledge that has been created together to look after Mother Earth, not to take, but to actually look after Mother Earth together, to bring back the kumara to the islands and to Aotearoa, to Rekohu. You also carried so much of their matauranga, their Indigenous knowledge from back in my home. And it was done through a lot of aroha. We have ancestral knowledge that is not just isolated in one island or the other, one place up on a hill in Ecuador or Peru, but it's actually been connected through thousands of years. And who tells us that? Our plant relations tell us that. We know it. We know it through the connection of our plants and our peoples and our stories and our histories, that the protection for Mother Earth has been part of the Indigenous connection across enormous oceans.
Well, just talking about kumara, of course, that's what really triggered, it was a catalyst for the Y262 claim, as you probably know, because Del Wihongi travelled to Japan and brought the kumara back from Japan that had been held in an institution over the original kumara cultivars, and she brought them back to New Zealand. But there's a beautiful story that I want to share with you, that when in 1998, as part of the Y262 hearings, I'd convened a special tribunal hearing of international witnesses, people like Dr. Daryl Posey, who had worked with the kaiapō people from Brazil for many years, Alejandro Ogmedo, who is a Quechuan from Peru, lives in Cusco, and Stefan Schneider, Aboriginal from Australia, Dr. Dave Stephenson, who's an IP lawyer in the United States. So we brought these people to New Zealand to give evidence and to explain to the tribunal and to the Crown, because the Crown had actually opposed this hearing, but they oppose everything, to say that what the Y262 claim was about was happening all around the world. It was a global movement. And so that was a very influential hearing. It was Rotorua 1998. While Alejandro was here, and he's a good friend of mine. In fact, I'm going to be talking to him tomorrow on a conference call to do with the International Society of. We're now part of a group called the Council of Elders of the ISE, and we're we're still involved, and there's a Congress of the ISE being held in Morocco May of this year, but we're going to give a Zoom sort of contribution to that. But anyway, so Alejandro was here, and I introduced him to Del Wihongi, one of the senior claimants for Te Raroa, or the senior claimant. And she thanked him on behalf of Māoridom for the kumara, for the gift of the kumara. And that was a beautiful moment. And she took him to the gardens that they had in Manukau, or Mangere, beg your pardon, and showed him all the different Māori potatoes that were growing there. And one of these potatoes is the peru peru. Peru peru is what Māori call it. A little purple potato, beautiful potato. And Alejandro was amazed, because he said, because he has established this organization called the Potato Park in the highlands of Cusco, and they are growing all of hundreds of different varieties of potato that are indigenous to Peru, just so that they can freely give out these cultivars of potato. But they didn't have the peru peru had been lost to them. And so Del made a koha of the peru peru to Alejandro, and he took that back, and they're now growing the potato park back in Cusco. So that sort of is what you were talking about, that reciprocity, that aroha between Indigenous peoples, those things that connect us over thousands of years and will continue to connect us in the future. And, for me, as an Indigenous man, that's been one of the great privileges and joys of being able to travel the world and meet my Indigenous brothers and sisters, because we just instantly connect. It's just, you don't even have to speak the same language. You just instantly connect. And that's such a beautiful thing. And it hasn't happened by accident. It's through thousands of years even though we've been separated, we're actually still all part of one big family. And I guess Indigenous peoples feel that more strongly because we're more strongly connected to the earth, as all human beings were at one stage. But the Industrial Revolution and science has created that separation. And we need, as a human species, we need to reconnect to the source of who we are. And Indigenous peoples are a portal to help us do that. And this is really what the Y262 claim was about as well. But expecting the Crown in its sort of prosaic way to get that picture is that's a huge leap. But we did the best we could, and I know the integrity and the vision of those original claimants will live on for generations, and it's already being picked up by the next generation. The children and the grandchildren are carrying on that kaupapa, and I was up at Waitangi earlier this month, and was part of a Y262 presentation there. So there's a lot of work still going on, but it's really a work of the heart to give back and to help Papatunuk. That's how I see it.
I completely agree, Maui. And I feel that when you tell me the story of the Peru going back to the Andes, I'm feeling that, as I was saying before, our descendants and our ancestors return home. They always do. So their child that was lost in there and started to, and created a beautiful home here and needed to return home to. And it's the same with you, Karapuna. They will come back home. They will always come back home. And it shows us those connections. It shows us that the struggle and the fight and the incredible work done by Indigenous peoples is what is going to be returning us home. And what is returning us home is returning us to their understanding that we are here to look after, to protect, to be guardians, and to be responsible for our mother and for all of those that come with her. Maui, one last question for you. I have heard about some of the incredible work that you've done alongside so many incredible people. And I've heard some of the challenges that you have experienced through this whole incredible journey too. But what I wanted to know was, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, that's a big question. I guess, there's lots of different categories to that. But just in terms of this kōrero that we've been having, I really just hope that humanity will make the right decisions. And I remain hopeful that we will. And take the best of our traditional Indigenous knowledge and the best of science to come up with the best solutions to save our planet and thus save ourselves. And I think it's doable, but we need to overcome our arrogance and our greed and our egos to be more humble in the way we relate to planet Earth and to one another. And, I guess I have, as a Moriori man, I've always sort of looked at what my ancestors did and making this total commitment to peace. We're not going to kill again, even if that costs us. And I must say I've struggled with that, because knowing how it all played out after they made that decision. But in a way, we're at that point in our history as a planet. What decision are we going to make as a human species? Are we going to make the right decision and choose the right path? Or is it going to be a zero-sum game where we're all losers? And, for their time, when Moriori set aside warfare killing and learned to live in peace and to share the resource of the land and the sea and respecting other creatures in these islands, I guess I honour them for that. And I'm proud of what they did here. And it's an example, I think, that if humanity makes those choices, we can not only survive, but we can thrive. And so I think there's real value in that traditional knowledge and those values, but we need to do that as a species and respecting other species. So my hope is that we will learn that respect, and Indigenous peoples, I think, and the way that our thinking has evolved and matured, have something truly valuable to offer to the world. And if we combine that with what science has to offer, the best of it, then I think we can do some incredible things for this planet and for ourselves. So that's my hope, that we will come to that. And we will, each and every one of us, every single human being, no matter if you think, oh, it's just too hard, but every single person can make a difference. That's my belief.
Thank you, Maui. As I said again, Moriori continue to be leading in what is possible. Not only what could be possible, but what was and continues to be possible in looking at our earth and each other with that love and peace. And I know that Rongamai Whenua will be looking and be incredibly proud of the incredible leader that he has as a descendant that continues to carry that covenant of peace. And in a world that is built on violence at the moment, but there's so much more love, I believe, in our future. And that future has been built by those like your grandfather and now by you and your descendants as well. I thank you with all my heart from all of me and all of us. I thank all of you and all of yous for the time, the love, the wisdom shared. I cannot thank you enough, Maui, for the lessons that you have imparted today, for the love that you have shown your people, but also millions of Indigenous people around the world and all peoples, because what you are doing right now is the materialization of hope. So I thank you from all of our relations, the trees, the birds, the power, the kina.
It's been lovely. And I'd like to close our little zui with a Moriori karaki. And this karaki is called manaka mai. And it's a karaki that was said when ancestors planted their kopi forests, planted their trees. And it's an invocation to give strength to the roots, to the shoots, to the stem, to the branches, and to the leaves, and may it grow healthy and strong. It goes like this. Ino tātou. Manaka mai te tiri uta, manaka mai te whi uta, manaka mai te aki uta, manaka mai te tiri uta, ka uaue. Uia mai rupu take, mere pu kere kere kia mahuta ai. E tu nā tu tākina, uia whenua. Oko mena tai merong. Tawa tūrā.